The fact of the matter is that sanctions have now become part of the new normal. We would do well to consider its consequences. For that matter, we would do well to consider where an ever escalating global trade war will lead to. Can the West still win such wars as it has in the past? And if not, what are the consequences of losing? You see, America's opponents are challenging the existing global order that they consider to be a unipolar world, where the United States and its allies have the military and economic power to dictate security terms to the rest of the world. They want a world that's multipolar, where the division of power and influence is more equitably shared. Among them are a growing number of economic heavyweights who have aligned themselves with America's principal adversaries, China and Russia. The now expanded BRICS includes such once bitter enemies as Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Together, these economies are challenging Western dominance in a fashion that we have not seen for over a century. Over the last 2 decades, the founding members of BRICS, China, Russia, India, Brazil, were the fourth fastest growing economies in the world. And the 5th fastest, Saudi Arabia, has recently joined. The United States, by comparison, would have been the 12th fastest. And countries are lining up around the block to join BRICS. If indeed BRICS accepts everyone who wants to join, soon its GDP will dwarf that of the G7. It will contain over 4 billion people, over half of the world's population. It will possess almost half of the world's oil reserves. It will have 2/3 of the world's natural gas reserves. It will be a force to contend with. As BRICS memberships grow, the reach and effectiveness of Western sanctions shrink. Instead of isolating Russia as a pariah nation condemned by the rest of the world for its invasion in Ukraine, what sanctions have done is fractured the global economy into 2 opposing geopolitical blocs. So, what have sanctions actually achieved? There's been 11 rounds of them so far against Russia. It's been 3 years, so it's a legitimate question to ask. There's certainly no question that sanctions have profoundly changed the way the global economy operates. But that's, after all, not what they were intended to do. What they were intended to do was bring the Russian economy to its knees. I mean, they were advertised as the most crippling sanctions ever imposed against the country in the post-war period. But contrary to the widespread expectations of the governments of sanctioning countries, the Russian economy did not crumble to its knees. The short recession that it had was certainly not out of line with the recessions that we saw in sanctioning countries, such as Germany and the UK, and for that matter, the entire European Union, which has just recently crawled out of a recession. And sanctions certainly haven't stopped the Russian war machine. Russia is now in its 3rd year of conflict. And if anything, sanctions have spurred the transformation of the Russian economy into a war economy, which only means that it can sustain the effort for much longer than before. So that's one reason that I guess things haven't worked out.
You know, I think many people in the audience were surprised when you talked about the number of sanctions and how they went up from 20 years ago in the last 20 years, they've really exploded, but really under the Biden administration, how much they've gone up. With these new tariffs coming in on EV, on electric vehicles from China into the US, because of the new NAFTA, we're going to be impacted by that. But how should Canada respond to that?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the electric vehicles, because one of the casualties of sanctions has been environmental efforts. Okay, I've got a chapter, actions against global climate change will just have to wait. In Europe, total reversal. I mean, they've replaced Russian natural gas with coal. Okay, so you know where their emissions are going. In the United States, there were two major environmental objectives of the Biden administration, and the Biden administration wears many coats of greenwash. One was to decarbonize the power grid. But unfortunately, 95% of the solar panels came from China, and now they're banned at the border. So hence, no decarbonization of the power grid. And the second, of course, is the idea that we're only going to have electric vehicles by 2035. The problem is that the batteries that those electric vehicles will run on are all made in China. So if we sanction Chinese batteries, we'll be driving gasoline vehicles for a long time. And if that's the case, why didn't they approve Keystone XL? Because it looks like there'll be lots of demand for oil in the US economy.